Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Since late December, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been rocked by daily protests that have been spreading and building momentum with each passing day, fueled by deep-seated economic and political frustration. According to a Norway-based human rights group called Iran Human Rights, at least 60 people, including 9 children, have been killed in these demonstrations so far. These protests are the biggest in Iran since the 2022-23 rallies nationwide that were sparked in the aftermath of the death in custody of Mahsa Amini, who had been arrested for allegedly violating Iran's strict dress code. Though the Iranian government has adopted a much more cautious approach this time on the ground, the initial protests over the cost of living crisis have morphed to include slogans that are aimed directly at the clerical authorities, calling for an overthrow of the government. Our next report gets you the details.
A wave of unrest has been sweeping across the Islamic Republic of Iran since the 28th of December. Iranians, young and old, rich and poor, and from all walks of life, have been pouring onto the streets of the capital Tehran and several other cities. Disenchanted and furious at the clerical establishment which has ruled them for close to half a century. Chanting slogans including "Death to the Dictator" and setting fire to official buildings, they have been calling for an end to the Islamic Republic and, in many places, for the restoration of the monarchy. The 2-week-long movement began on the 28th of December, with shopkeepers in the capital Tehran angered by yet another fall in the value of the Iranian currency, going on strike over high prices and economic stagnation. According to Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, in the government crackdown since then, security forces have unlawfully used rifles, shotguns loaded with metal pellets, water cannons, tear gas, and beatings to disperse, intimidate, and punish largely peaceful protesters. In an attempt to suppress sweeping protests, authorities imposed a total connectivity blackout, cutting off Iran largely from the outside world. Internet monitor NetBlocks estimated that by early Friday, the country had been offline for 12 hours. With protesters openly calling for an end to almost half a century of theocratic rule, these demonstrations pose one of the biggest challenges yet to the Islamic Republic. But Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, on Friday struck a defiant tone on the escalating protests, calling the demonstrators vandals and saboteurs, and even predicting the removal of the US president.
Last night in Tehran, a bunch of vandals came and destroyed a building that belongs to them to please the US president. US President Donald Trump's hands are stained with the blood of more than 1,000 Iranians. Everyone knows the Islamic Republic came to power with the blood of hundreds of thousands of honorable people. It will not back down in the face of saboteurs.
The American president, Donald Trump, who had earlier threatened to respond if Iran killed innocent protesters, suggested in an interview that the 86-year-old Ali Khamenei may be looking to leave Iran. In these protests, the clamor for a return to the monarchy, which essentially means a comeback for US-based Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah of Iran who was overthrown in 1979, has been growing more vocal by the day. In a video released on social media on Friday, Iran's exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi thanked protesters and renewed his call, asking marching protesters to join together to create even bigger crowds.
My fellow countrymen, I am proud of all of you who took to the streets across the country on Thursday night. To all of you, I give you my thanks. I invite field leaders to try to get the crowds to join together so that the crowd grows even larger. I know that you will not abandon the streets despite challenges such as internet outage. Be assured that victory is yours.
A day after the biggest rallies on Thursday, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi blamed the American and Israeli officials, who he accused of being blatantly open about their direct intervention in protests in Iran.
This is what the Americans and Israelis have stated, that they are directly intervening in the protests in Iran. They are trying to transform the peaceful protests in Iran into divisive and violent ones.
While there have been accusations of demonstrators acting on behalf of émigré opposition groups and the United States, there is no denying the fact that Iranians have a multitude of grievances against their own government, something that should be prioritized and looked into with sincerity and intent, rather than pointing the finger of blame elsewhere.
More than a dozen people have been killed and tens of thousands have fled due to the intense clashes between the Syrian government forces and the Kurdish fighters in the northern city of Aleppo. Both sides have traded blame and have accused each other of instigating the violence. The violence, which erupted on the 6th of January, has come as the two sides are struggling to implement a March deal to merge a semi-autonomous administration and a military run by the Kurds in Syria's north into the country's new Islamist government. On Wednesday, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged both sides to show restraint and swiftly resume negotiations to implement the March agreement, but to no avail. A ceasefire between the Syrian army and the Syrian Democratic Forces that was agreed on Friday has failed to hold, and the hostilities continue. Our next report tells you more.
The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or the SDF, controls swathes of Syria's oil-rich north and northeast, and had played an instrumental role in the territorial defeat of the Islamic State group in Syria in 2019. In March 2025, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which has tens of thousands of fighters, signed a deal to integrate all military and civilian institutions into the Syrian state by the end of the year. But differences between the sides, including Kurdish demands for decentralized rule, has impeded progress. The Kurdish-majority neighborhoods of Sheikh Maqsoud and Ashrafiyeh in the northern city of Aleppo have remained under the control of Syrian Democratic Forces, despite Kurdish fighters agreeing to withdraw from the areas in April. On Tuesday, intense fighting broke out between Syrian government forces and Kurdish fighters, with both sides accusing each other of being the agent provocateur. Several people have been killed and wounded in the worst violence in Aleppo since the fall of Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad last December and the arrival of the new Islamist leadership. In addition to the people killed and wounded, tens of thousands of civilians have fled the neighborhoods of Sheikh Maqsoud and Ashrafiyeh via safe corridors, but many continue to be trapped, fearful of the snipers.
Why is this sectarianism and racism happening? Why is there us and them? We're all the children of Syria. Our identity is Syrian and is inclusive of all sects. These strikes are displacing us, and we're already displaced.
A projectile hit the yard next to our house, so we left. There's no one left in the streets. The situation is really bad for the people inside. Whoever has the means can hide. We spent the entire night under a staircase, me and the children.
Mazloum Abdi, who leads the US-backed Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, has warned that the eruption of violence has undermined talks with Damascus. According to the state media, Abdi had visited Damascus on Sunday for further talks on the March deal on integrating his forces, but the discussions were inconclusive. Complicating the situation are neighboring Israel and Turkey, who have been vying for influence in Syria since the December 2024 toppling of longtime ruler Bashar al-Assad. On Thursday, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan pinned the blame for the recent escalation on the Syrian Democratic Forces and accused it of collaborating with Israel.
The events in Aleppo over the past few days are unfortunately a manifestation of what we have been warning about and repeatedly stating for the past year. If the SDF had started a genuine process of integration within their own country instead of playing for time, we would not be seeing any of this. Now is the time for national unity. The SDF needs to do its part at this point. However, it is no coincidence that instead it has become an actor that is coordinating with Israel and becoming a tool in Israel's divide and rule policy in our region.
The Syrian Democratic Forces have so far been reluctant to give up the autonomy it won during the country's 13-year civil war, when it helped U.S.-led forces in defeating the Islamic State group. While an impasse in political negotiations continues, the fear is that an all-out conflict across northern Syria, potentially with Turkish and Israeli involvement, could once again destabilize a nation barely emerging out of a 13-year-long civil war.
Russia used the Oreshnik ballistic missile as part of a massive all-night strike on Ukraine. 4 people were killed and 25 others suffered injuries in Kiev on the 8th of January, where loud booms could be heard for several hours, setting the sky alight with explosions. This is only the second time that Moscow has used the Oreshnik missile that was first deployed to hit the central city of Dnipro in November 2024. Russia's defense ministry has said that the strike was in response to a Ukrainian drone attack that targeted Vladimir Putin's residence. Now, President Volodymyr Zelensky and the Ukrainian authorities have confirmed that a ballistic missile struck infrastructure in Lviv, about 60 kilometers from the Polish border. So why has the beginning of the year 2026 witnessed this sharp escalation in a war that still shows no signs of coming to an end, despite almost completing 4 years? Our next report tells you more.
Russia bombarded Ukraine with hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles in a large-scale overnight attack, killing at least 4 people in the capital. For only the second time in the nearly 4-year-old war, it used a powerful new hypersonic missile that struck western Ukraine in a clear warning to Kyiv's NATO allies. The intense barrage and the launch of the nuclear-capable Oreshnik missile came just days after Ukraine and its allies reported major progress toward agreeing on how to defend the country from further Russian aggression. The attack coincides with a new chill in relations between Moscow and Washington, after Russia condemned the American seizure of an oil tanker in the North Atlantic. It comes as the American President Donald Trump signaled that he is on board with a hard-hitting sanctions package, meant to economically cripple Moscow, which has given no public signal that it is willing to budge from its maximalist demands on Ukraine.
There was another Oreshnik attack, this time against the Lviv region. This was again demonstratively close to the borders of the European Union, and this, from the point of view of the use of medium-range ballistics, is the same challenge for Warsaw, Bucharest, Budapest, and many other capitals. Everyone should understand the same thing and take it equally seriously. If the Russians don't even try to come up with a plausible reason for using such weapons, then personal connections or any rhetoric won't get you away from it.
About half of Kyiv's apartment buildings have been left without any power and access to heating, at a time when the daytime temperatures have dipped to -8 degrees Celsius. Water supplies have also been disrupted. Putin has previously said the Oreshnik missile streaks to its target at a speed of Mach 10 like a meteorite, and is immune to any missile defense system that can be fielded by the West. Several of the Oreshnik missiles used in a conventional strike all at once could be as devastating as a nuclear attack. Putin has also warned that Russia could use it against Western allies of Kyiv that allow it to strike inside Russia with their longer-range missiles. The Oreshnik missile has 6 warheads, each carrying 6 submunitions. The coalition of the willing that met in Paris on the 6th of January was clear about one thing. The hardest yards of this war are still ahead of Ukraine.
It's important that we're starting the year like this. European and American allies, side by side with President Zelensky, standing for peace. And we are closer to that goal than ever. But of course, the hardest yards are still ahead.
Pope Leo XIV, speaking at the Vatican, urged the international community to keep pushing for peace and to end the suffering in Ukraine. War is back in vogue and the zeal for war is spreading, said the Pope, who was elected in May last year.
It is painful to see how, especially in the West, the space for genuine freedom of expression is rapidly shrinking. At the same time, a new Orwellian-style language is developing, which, in an attempt to be increasingly inclusive, ends up excluding those who do not conform to the ideologies that are fueling it.
"37-year-old Renee Nicole Good was a prize-winning poet and a guitarist by hobby who was originally from Colorado Springs and had moved to the city of Minneapolis just last year from Kansas City. A devoted Christian, she had previously worked as a dental assistant and at a credit union, but in recent years had been mainly a stay-at-home mother of 3 young children. On the 7th of January, she was at the scene of an Immigration and Customs Enforcement or an ICE raid in the south of Minneapolis as a legal observer, a position that she had volunteered for, which entails monitoring the police and the security forces at protests and other operations. Now, described as an extremely compassionate person, Renee Nicole Good's life was abruptly cut short when she was gunned down in her car by a federal immigration agent in Minneapolis, less than a mile from the site of George Floyd's murder back in 2020 by a police officer. Our next report tells you more.
America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, is wrestling with a war within. On Wednesday, 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good, a promising poet and a mother of 3 children, was gunned down in broad daylight by a federal immigration agent on a snow-lined street in the Midwestern city of Minneapolis. Reportedly, the Minneapolis shooting was at least the 9th immigration enforcement-related shooting since September, all involving individuals who were targeted while in their vehicles. In what is perhaps indicative of the deep divide in American politics, almost immediately after the shooting, 2 starkly different accounts began to take shape. According to the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, the victim, Renee Nicole Good, was herself to blame for the shooting as she drove away from ICE officers and had weaponized her car in what Noem labeled as a domestic terror attack.
Did you call any of your people?
ICE agents repeatedly ordered her to get out of the car and to stop obstructing law enforcement, but she refused to obey their commands. She then proceeded to weaponize her vehicle, and she attempted to run a law enforcement officer over. This appears as an attempt to kill or to cause bodily harm to agents, an act of domestic terrorism. The ICE officer, fearing for his life and the other officers around him and the safety of the public, fired defensive shots. He used his training to save his own life and that of his colleagues. He was treated at a local hospital, has been released, and is now with family.
On the other hand, Jacob Frey, the Democratic mayor of Minneapolis, while denouncing the ICE killing, said that the federal agent had recklessly used lethal force, further demanding that the immigration enforcement officials leave the city.
What we do know is that a 37-year-old woman is dead and that she was shot by ICE. We've dreaded this moment since the early stages of this ICE presence in Minneapolis. Not only is this a concern that we've had internally, we've been talking about it. They are already trying to spin this as an action of self-defense. Having seen the video of myself, I want to tell everybody directly, that is bullshit. This was an agent recklessly using power that resulted in somebody dying, getting killed.
U.S. President Donald Trump doubled down by calling the deceased legal observer a professional agitator and pinned the blame on what he described as a radical left movement of violence and hate. Called the shooting totally predictable and totally avoidable, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz argued that it was a direct consequence of the surge in federal immigration officers into Minneapolis and surrounding areas in recent days. A day after the shooting, hundreds of people gathered around Minneapolis in protest, chanting slogans against ICE. In retaliation, federal immigration officers, armed with pepper ball guns and tear gas, wrestled several protesters to the ground.
Watching that woman get murdered yesterday, no more. Like, this can't continue to happen. And I can't sit home and just watch it. I feel like at least I'm here and I'll effing raise my voice as loud as I can.
Anyone who's seen the video knows that she was not doing anything wrong, and that she was brutally murdered. And then to have the administration deny the facts in front of our eyes, I mean, we're not stupid. Anyone can see that. So, in my opinion, to deny the truth of that is to make people afraid to not come out and look at what ICE is doing. And so,
similar protests over the killing of Renee Good took place in Houston, Cincinnati, Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia, where protesters demanded justice for Renee. In a separate incident on Thursday afternoon, U.S. federal agents shot and wounded 2 individuals in the western city of Portland, Oregon, drawing widespread criticism and inflaming the already tense situation. Ironically, Renee Good was shot dead barely a mile from where George Floyd was murdered in 2020 by a city police officer, triggering worldwide anti-racism protests. The killing of Renee Nicole Good has, once again, besieged the land of the free with a palpable sense of insecurity and vulnerability, and puts a big question mark over the functioning of immigration and customs enforcement agents.
At least 30 people were killed and several others were kidnapped from a market in the Niger state of Nigeria. According to the police, the gunmen stormed the Kasuwan Daji market in the Demo village on the 3rd of January, burning stalls and looting food items. Now, the attack came just weeks after one of the worst kidnappings in the history of Nigeria, where more than 300 children and staff were abducted from a Catholic school in the state of Niger. From schools to places of worship and now to busy public spaces, Nigeria is witnessing an increased wave of attacks, following the U.S. President Donald Trump's strike against the so-called Islamic State militant camps in northwest Nigeria on Thursday. Now, Nigeria's security forces are stretched thin as Africa's most populous country faces multiple conflicts in different parts of the country. Our next report tells you more.
The state of Niger in Nigeria has witnessed yet another armed attack, just weeks after one of the worst school kidnappings in its history, where more than 300 children, including staff, were abducted from a Catholic school in the state of Niger in Nigeria. According to the Niger State Police, over 30 people were killed and many others were kidnapped from a local market by the bandits. The members of the armed gang stormed the Kasuwan Daji market in the Demo village, opening fire indiscriminately on residents and kidnapping them.
All the children were taken, even the smallest one. All 5 of my children were there. Nothing remains.
Later on the 6th of January, at least 9 Nigerian soldiers were killed after their military vehicle hit a roadside bomb, which was allegedly planted by an Islamic State-affiliated group in Borno State in the northeast part of the country. Attacks and kidnappings by armed criminal gangs have been a problem in Nigeria for years, but reports in western and central regions have spiked recently. Gangs that are locally called bandits frequently carry out these mass kidnappings and killings for ransom. On the December 25th, which is Christmas Day, the United States conducted air attacks against the Islamic State militants in northwest Nigeria, following President Trump's pledge to take action on what he claims is a Christian genocide in Nigeria.
could be. I mean, a lot of things I envisage, a lot of things. They're killing record numbers of Christians in Nigeria. And they have other countries very bad also. You know that part of the world, very bad. They're killing the Christians and killing them in very large numbers. We're not going to allow that to happen.
The office of the president, Bola Tinubu, said that the attackers may have been militants who were fleeing from parts of northwestern Nigeria following those airstrikes. The Minister of Information, Mohammed Idris, said in a statement that when the market was attacked, the bullets hit the victims indiscriminately, and those who were killed and abducted were traders, farmers, parents, and children from both Muslim and Christian communities. Nigeria faces multiple conflicts linked to a long-running jihadist insurgency. Bandits, farmer-herder violence, and separatist insurgencies have caused a large number of casualties.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. If you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or questions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.